This week's Nifty Gifties on F5 Live Refreshing Technology is proudly powered by the Microsoft Store. Whether you're looking for a new laptop, tablet, Xbox, games, or a whole lot more, you can get them at the Microsoft Store. Remember, current students, faculty, parents, and active military can save up to 10% off almost everything. To browse the products and learn more about the discounts, you can go to f5live.tv/Microsoft. We've spent a lot of time talking about privacy and security over the last couple of years. We've got a couple of topics tonight. One of them involves a part of your computer that, unless you're somebody who spends time inside their computer, like Avram and myself and people around us, you probably don't think a whole lot about. It's the motherboard. It's the thing that all of the components on your computer connect to. If you have a motherboard from Gigabyte, there's a potential problem. A seemingly innocuous feature was included in these boards that when the board powers on, it goes and checks to see if there's firmware updates. If there is, it downloads them, executes the update, updates the board, does another power cycle, and then runs the newly updated firmware. Most of this happens in a speed that you would never notice. It happens in a, behind the scenes. It just looks like the system is posting. And then your system just keeps going. It seems like the startup takes a couple seconds longer than normal, but you're off and running. And it keeps your board up to date, which is something that nobody does. Nobody keeps the firmware on their motherboard up to date, unless you're Avram or myself, probably. Outside.
And even there, it's not necessarily recommended to update it all the time, because
Right.
it's usually an if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of situation with motherboard firmware.
Yeah, true. If you're switching processors and you've got to do a firmware update to get access to the new processor or something like that, like you do with AMD sometimes, there's that. But for most of us, most people never even think about it. This is doing it behind the scenes automatically, for better or worse. Now, where's the problem come in? Oh, right. The board is doing a software update outside of all the security stuff that takes place on your computer that prevents viruses and things like that to be on your system, and it just calls out to a website and downloads the thing on the other side and installs it. There's a lot of ways to get in between there, middleman attack, to get between the server and the motherboard and install something else instead. An altered version of the firmware that allows somebody from the outside to take advantage of your computer. In fact, adding a backdoor like this into a motherboard's firmware is Hacker 101. But they usually have to have access to your computer in order to do it. In this case, Gigabyte has given it to them themselves. Now, is the average user going to be under attack by this? Probably not, but the type of people who are, this opens up a big door for. I'm running a Gigabyte motherboard in mission control on one of those machines, and I can't help but wonder if that's where my troubles came from. Because, sometimes my brain goes down the conspiracy theory route. But yeah, you've been following this even closer than I have.
So Gigabyte claims to have a fix as of Thursday.
Okay.
So if you have Gigabyte, if you go to gigabyte.com/motherboard and look for the latest firmware to download for your motherboard, as opposed to letting it download it for you, you should probably do that, because if the firmware was released, say, in this month of June, then it supposedly has a fix. Now, the nature of the fix is not totally detailed here. It says, to fortify system security, Gigabyte has implemented stricter security checks during the boot process. During the OS boot process, these measures are designed to detect and prevent any malicious activities. Signature verification. Gigabyte bolstered the validation process for files downloaded from remote servers. This enhanced verification ensures the integrity and legitimacy of the contents, thwarting any attempts by hackers to insert malicious code. Privilege access limitations. Gigabyte has enabled standard cryptographic verification of remote server certificates. This guarantees that files are exclusively downloaded from servers with validated and trusted certificates.
Okay.
So
So
now,
that's a great starting point. I will tell you, proper client server certificating is a huge solution to this problem, but a real pain. I've done it. It's not fun.
so but why don't they just disable this feature, like the automatic update feature? I mean, you could do it through. I don't know if I totally understand this, but I think it's doing it through the firmware of the motherboard is doing it versus having your Gigabyte app, Gigabyte utility motherboard
Correct.
control panel app do it.
Correct. It's done during
So
post.
how, like, what I don't get though is how during post does it know the Wi-Fi password? Like if you're on a Wi-Fi network.
So if you're on a Wi-Fi network, it may or may not have any kind of access. It's probably hardwired.
So
Unless,
probably only if you're on Ethernet.
yeah, unless the Gigabyte app is able to pull the Wi-Fi credentials from Windows and then push it to the firmware. I'm not going to
That
pretend to have any
seems
idea, but
that seems odd.
it does. So my guess is it's a hardwire feature. Just a guess.
I mean, I had a Gigabyte motherboard in my last computer, and I did not notice it doing anything like that.
Hmm.
I mean, the Gigabyte software was very annoying because it kept saying that it wanted to download BIOS updates, and then it didn't do it or whatever. But you know, but the but aside, but I mean, this is something I haven't personally seen, so I don't totally understand how it works. But you can apparently, if you have a Gigabyte motherboard, you can go into the BIOS and disable this.
Okay.
And even with this fix, I think it might be a good idea to go into the BIOS and disable it because I don't think you want it updating the BIOS without your consent anyway.
Right. In general, I am not a fan of, I hate to use this phrase, but it's the only thing I can come up with, non-consensual updates. I I'm not a fan of that. We know there are memes about, Windows doing updates without asking, and then you're in the middle of doing something. It's like, hey, we're going to reboot in 60 seconds. Please no. But yes, the idea of streamlined background stuff for a lot of people is okay for software and things. Like, your browser staying up to date. Sure. Unless there's a very specific reason why you can't let it update. The browser updating the background, I'm generally fine with. Word, maybe, although I'm always afraid that a feature is going to go away in a in a case like that. But the idea of the software that's actually holding the core of the computer together, because if something goes sideways on the firmware,
Your computer could be bricked.
yeah.
So generally
You
speaking,
reboot your computer and then all of a sudden it doesn't work. Well, I didn't do anything. No, you didn't do anything. It did something. Uh-oh.
yeah, yeah. Generally speaking, the advice that I mean, contrary, like everybody's always saying, like make sure you're always updating your software, update your Windows, update your Linux, update your, update your browser, update. But the one thing that I think a lot of professionals say is don't update your BIOS
Yeah.
unless you really need, unless somebody gives you a compelling reason to do so. Like, oh, there is a FYI, there is a security hole update,
Mm-hmm.
or now we need support for a new CPU or something like that.
Right.
But if there's not a known problem, usually it's advised not to do that
Right.
because you don't know. So doing that without even informing you is, I think, a really kind of a violation of trust. Like, you probably shouldn't do that. I get where they're coming from. Like, hey, we put this work into these BIOS updates. We think people should have them. Maybe we think that they've patched things that are little bugs or whatever, and we don't want to have to do support for whatever bugs are in it. Like, just
Right.
everybody have the latest, which I get. Like, people, this is the same thing with the operating system. Like, they don't want people to be having to have support issues that have already been fixed, but
Right.
they don't know it's fixed. But for the firmware, this is an area that is maybe the most sensitive on your whole computer.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that they theoretically have a fix. Um, the fix sounds solid enough to the particular problem we're talking about, and the particular problem we're talking about is this unsecure backdoor. They have essentially put two sniper trained security guards on the back door, which is great. However, I'm still not happy with the idea of an auto updating system firmware. So I'm with you.
Yep.
Even if you've got this update, turn the feature off. If you've got a Gigabyte motherboard, turn this feature off, because like Avram said, it is not advised by anybody to be constantly updating the firmware of your motherboard, because it's the most important part of the system, and I've always felt that it's being held together with chewing gum and rubber bands a little bit as it is.
Right.
So tightening those rubber bands for me is not a better solution. So overall, if you can get in there, turn it off, because this is not a win, patch or not. Hello, YouTube. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of F5 Live Refreshing Technology. If you did, please subscribe to the channel down below, and of course hit the notification bell, because we know that subscriptions don't mean much on YouTube anymore. If you've got topics that you'd like us to talk about in the future, please comment them down below. And if you'd like to not follow us on YouTube, there's lots of ways that you can follow along with our content by going to plughitslive.com/subscribe. There you'll see all of our shows and all of the ways that you can watch, listen, and follow along.